I think I know what your trick is. You're going to go take a 10-minute nap, and I don't blame you.
No, I'm not. I'm going to go out there and sit and watch you, because if I sit here at this microphone, I'm going to interrupt you obnoxiously.
Oh, okay. I was just kidding. But anyway, I think I would if I were in your case. Anyway, thanks for giving me the floor for a few minutes. I should have known I was coming and should have prepared, but what the heck? You know, all I got to do is just think for a minute, where are we now? Where are we headed? I was talking with a group of people in San Francisco last week. I was attending a conference there, and there was this very nice young lady that happened to sit next to me at the dinner table, and she said, well, how do you know what's going to happen in the future? How can you predict? And everybody was saying that I had done a fairly good job of predicting things in the financial world, because when I published The Creature from Jekyll Island, the first printing was 1994, and I had just about everything that has happened and unfolded in recent years was predicted in that book. And so people thought, well, I've got some kind of a power of clairvoyancy or a crystal ball or something. And so she said, how can you predict these things so accurately? So I just had to explain to her something which was so simple and obvious to me, but not to her. And that is that, well, we know where we are now, but that doesn't tell us where we're headed, because if we're like in the center of a wheel, like if we're the hub of a wheel, heck, we could go in any direction in 360 degrees around that wheel. We don't know where we're headed until we go backward in time. Now, if we just are concerned with where we are now and where we're going, we don't know anything. But if we go back in time, and if we're willing to look at a little bit of history and see where we have been, now we can draw a straight line between some point in the past and where we are now, and now we've got an axis. Now we can say with all accuracy, if we just continue to do what we're doing, and without any substantial changes, we're going to continue going in the direction we're going. So that's pretty simple when you think about it. I became aware of political and economic issues for the first time in my life after I was married, after I was already working in the corporate world. I was climbing the corporate ladder, or so I thought. I thought that was the thing I had to do, make some money, live in a nice house, have a great wife and a couple of kids and a station wagon and a dog and all of the sort of things that we get, focused on when we're young and don't know any better. Not that any of those things are bad. It's just that there are other things in life. And that's what I was doing. So it was back in 1959 and 1960 before I began to look around and realize that, what the heck, things weren't really what I thought they were. And I began to look beneath the surface. And that was for the first time that I really began to take a look backward in time. Not in terms of the history books that I had to go through when I was in school. It's not in the sense of remembering a bunch of dates. There was the date of the Boer War, and what was the date of the American Civil War, and what was the city, and who were the names of the conquerors and those things. No, what I began to discover was the human element, the human motivation, the hidden agendas. I discovered that most of history is driven by the engine of conspiracy. Well, I wasn't really focused on that word conspiracy in those days. I didn't realize back in 1960 that you weren't supposed to think of conspiracies because that's supposed to make you a kook. None of that was out there yet. But I did discover that, my gosh, when you look at every major event in history, there were a couple of conspiracies involved. So I began to accept that idea without any problem. And the question then became, well, what drove these conspiracies? What was the motivation? What were the counterforces? What was to be gained? Who was the winner and who was the loser? Then I began to realize that the history books that I had been reading generally were written by the winners. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe the history I was learning wasn't entirely accurate. I found out to some extent that is true. They're always written by the winners. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that my mind gradually was opened to a different kind of tableau, a different kind of understanding of history. And I began to realize that there were certain lines that came directly to where I was standing in the present being 1960, and I could see that we were headed right toward a condition in which all the freedoms and all the lifestyle and all the affluence which we were enjoying in the 1960s was being attacked. It was the enemy. There were people in powerful positions who were doing their best, even then, in fact, long before then, to get rid of that. That they were trying to create a global system, which they now call the New World Order. But in those days, that word wasn't, or that phrase wasn't very popular. But they were talking about world government. And they were talking about what kind of world government. They were talking about the need to control everything at the top, to have a system which is what we call collectivism, the kind of a system in which the masses are told what to do by the very wise leaders at the top. Not the kind of system that we had in America, where the people were in charge and they elected their representatives to be their servants. No, they had to get rid of that, they said, because that was inefficient. That wouldn't work. That would lead to wars. That would lead to all kinds of bad things. People would be selfish. There'd be famine. There'd be hunger. There'd be wars and so forth. So they were going to change all that by putting the world under a collectivist system. Well, I started to read this stuff, and in many cases it was coming directly from the source of the planners themselves. It wasn't just somebody writing about what they discovered or what they thought there was in history. This was something written by the partakers in this themselves. I remember running across a couple of books by Harold Lamb, who was a historian that lived in the Beverly Hills area, as I recall. And he wrote some books about Tamerlane, Timur the Lame, one of the practically a contemporary of Genghis Khan from that area of the world. One of the people who changed history in Asia, a conqueror of tremendous intelligence and cunning. In fact, some of the moves, I believe, that we use in the game of chess were actually based upon war strategies of Tamerlane. And I read the book by Harold Lamb about Tamerlane, another one he wrote on Theodora and the Emperor, Theodora being the queen of the last emperor of Rome. As I recall, it was Justinian, who was a little measly guy, and she took over and ran the empire in its final days. And amazingly, she was a prostitute, and she came from the Colosseum. She was one of the common prostitutes that the emperor took a liking to and brought her to the palace. But she was so strong-willed and so intelligent, it didn't take long before everybody in the court was coming to her for decisions and directions, and she rapidly became the queen or the empress of Rome. I didn't know any of that. Man, if they had told me these things when I was in high school, I would have had an interest in history, but I didn't know any of that. So the point I'm leading to is that with the writings of Harold Lamb, for the first time, I was able to read in the words of the participants themselves. Most of his history books were written or taken from the surviving records, the diaries and the court records and things where people themselves living those events spoke about them and expressed their innermost thoughts and their motivations. This is when I discovered that history was extremely interesting, and not only that, extremely important. Well, from that point forward, I began to look at history in a different light, and I realized that where we are today is a direct result of drawing a straight line from where we were, even as far back as 1,000 years ago, and to see what transformations that straight line went through, what kind of thinking filters it went through. And it was in pretty much a straight line until it reached the American Republic and the creation of our nation. I recognized that there was a great change. It was no longer a straight line. There was a change when our founding fathers won the American Revolution, and they had a chance to continue the line and just make themselves the new rulers, but instead they made a hard turn. And they said, no, we're going to not follow this pattern. We're going to create a system in which the people will be in charge, and the rulers, so-called rulers, will no longer be rulers. They will now be public servants. This was a whole new concept. and the founding fathers deserve the credit for that. So I recognize that was a major change in the pattern of history. So now that became the new point. I began to measure where we were at that point through the first 100 years of our existence, and I saw that it too was a straight line for the first 100 years. It led to prosperity. It led to personal freedom. It led to abundance. It led to a culture and a lifestyle that was the envy of the world. But then, at the turn of the last century, I saw that line start to curve. It curved more and more, starting with about the Wilson administration. It curved right back to where it used to be, back to that totalitarian concept, where the people were no longer in charge, but they were at the bottom of the pyramid, the bottom of the heap, and the rulers were once again in charge. It took about 50 years for that really to happen, and it's continuing to happen, but by the time the Wilson administration had given way to the Roosevelt administration, the course had already been changed. Well, you have to recognize, where you're coming from in history before you know where you're headed into the future. So I'm perhaps taking too long to say this, or I've said it too many times, but the point is, the answer to that young lady that was sitting there is that she has to learn some history. We all have to learn some history. The more history we know, the better we are at predicting where we're headed.
Because humans behave the same over and over again.
Absolutely. The motivations are the same. Our desires are the same. There's a fairly good even division between the good and the bad among most people. And the main thing, I think, is the lesson of history, is that if you give people the power to coerce their fellow human beings, you know what they're going to do?
They're going to do it.
They're going to do it. That's the bottom line. And so we have gradually moved from a government which had limitations on the government. The whole purpose of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution was primarily to put limitations on the power of government officials. The government shall not infringe on our right of freedom of speech or the right to bear arms or peaceful assembly or any of these things. It's that Congress shall pass no law.
Yeah, this is respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or the press or the right to assemble or petition the government for redress of grievances. And we know this is classical tyranny. For anybody who's read history and knows common sense, this is really scary what's happening. And now, G. Edward Griffin, they've rolled out, the Army is practicing to take over cities for your safety. The fact that they're unveiling that shows how far down the line we've gotten.
Well, that's the whole point. We've allowed that line of history to be turned right while we were watching it. And so we are now, I was going to say, headed back to the old style of government. I'm going to change that. I'm going to say we're already there. We've already returned to that stage. So now what we need to do is to move forward into the past.
Well, it's every generation faces a tyranny or a crisis, but every historian, every economist, every philosopher, every great mind I talk to, and even the enemies of freedom, Zbigniew Brzezinski and others, say this is the first time in modern history that all of humanity is awake and staring at the elite. And the globalists know that. So all of these attempts to flood everything with corruption and oppression is an attempt to reaffirm their illegitimate criminal dominance. And every person listening has to realize the magnitude of the historical human crossroads. You're going to die, G. Edward. I'm going to die. My children someday will die, but through them having more children and living on, if I could meet my great-great-great-great-grandson or daughter, I know I would love them as much as I love my children today and as you love your children and your family. And it's fundamental that we must get past the fear, and by looking into our children's eyes and our wives' eyes, we understand that there is no fear. The only fear I have is that we don't stand up and fight back. There is no fear in even being struck down by this dehumanizing system, because that's part of the human condition. Everything we have today, all the wealth, all the liberties, all the freedoms, all the great engines of creativity and the dynamic human spirit that we now have is based, and we stand on the shoulders of those founding fathers. We stand on the shoulders of the Magna Carta in 1215. We stand on the shoulders of every human exertion against oppression. And we know that liberty is the cornucopia of plenty. It is the cornucopia of enlightenment. It is the driving fulcrum of everything wholesome and good, and big government and tyranny and commissariats and